Hello and welcome to our 7-8 minutes of weekly Torah talk. With us today, Ben Fried. He is a student at JTS. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Your Parsha is Terumah. That's a challenging Parsha. In this Parsha, the people of Israel are called upon to contribute to the building of the temple. Gold, silver, copper, dyed wool, animal skins, and more things. On Mount Sinai, Moses is given detailed instructions on how to construct this temple. In the sanctuary's inner chamber was the ark containing the tablets with the Ten Commandments. In the outer chamber stood the seven-branched menorah. Outside the sanctuary stood the copper-plated altar. Surrounding the sanctuary was an enclosure of linen hangings supported by 60 wooden posts with silver hooks and trimmings. The first pasuk of this parsha says, דבר אל בני ישראל ויקחו לי תרומה מאת כל איש אשר ידבנו ליבו, תיקחו את תרומתי. Speak to the children of Israel and have them take for me an offering from every person whose heart inspires him to generosity. You shall take my offering. So I started by saying that this parsha is challenging, and I think our viewers can already understand why. It's filled with technical details, right?
Yeah, absolutely. That first verse about the Terumah that's from the people who incline their hearts is about as much narrative as it gets, and then it's a lot of descriptions of acacia wood and different skins and threads and all of these different things that go together to make the Mishkan, to make the tabernacle.
Right. And one of the questions that I have every year when I reread the Parsha is about the meaning of Terumah. Is this a voluntary thing? Or maybe, this is giving. Now, is this a tax? Or is this a Terumah, something that you do out of free will?
Right, and I think it's fascinating because we see so many times in Torah that there are taxes, that there are times when it's every person gives machatzita shekel, the half shekel, or, all of the princes give all of the exact same offering at one point, and it very much seems to be a prescribed offering. Here, what Bnei Israel is asked for is prescribed. They're asked for very specific things, but they're asked to give it out of the goodness of their own hearts.
Right.
So it's an interesting kind of dichotomy here where, on the one hand, it seems like a voluntary offering. It even says specifically that you should take from the people whose heart inclines them to give. And there's this idea of Terumah that comes from Ramah, that comes from raising up, that it's people who are raising up this offering seemingly voluntarily. But I think it's a fair question of how voluntary is it when God asks for it.
And
The same way
because
that,
he says, you must give gold or silver, but you can't just give your guitar.
Right. Right. It's very specific things. The way I was kind of thinking about it is, if your boss asks you like, oh, were you able to volunteer to stay late tonight? Then sure, you're volunteering, but it's also clear that there's a very specific thing that you're being volunteered to do.
Right. So that's the case oftentimes with God when he asks us to do things, and we must wonder whether we have free will or, it's really a facade and we just must go back to our tent, find whatever gold we might find there, and bring it back to the sanctuary.
Right. And I think that part of this is that it's really interesting that what they're actually asked to give, right, gold and silver, also things like acacia trees, where did these things come from? Where did they get them? What does it mean that they have them?
Yeah, it's
And
the
a
middle
lot
of the desert.
Right, exactly. So on one hand, a lot of the commentators say, all of this stuff comes from God in the first place. So you're really just giving it back to God. That really it was never fully yours. You were renting or leasing your property in a sense from God, and God is taking it back. But one of the commentaries I found that was fascinating was, it was Rashi who was quoting the Midrash Tanchuma, writing about specifically the acacia trees. They're like, where did they get these trees in the middle of the desert? And there's a midrash that Yaakov, when he was on his way down to Egypt, was planting acacia trees along the way, so that then 400 years later, when his descendants were leaving, they would be able to cut them down to make the Mishkan. And
Yeah,
what I was thinking about...
putting aside the possibility that he didn't come through the exact same route, because God
Right.
wanted them to wander in the desert for 40 years, so he took them in the roundabout way, but let's leave this aside.
Exactly. Setting that aside, when I read that, I was kind of reminded of the speech that Barack Obama gave a number of years ago that he got really criticized for when he said, oh, you have a business, you didn't build that. That so many things were prepared for you, that you had to have roads and you had to have internet hooked up and you had to have all these things that were paid for by other people's taxes that allowed you to succeed. And so therefore you need to pay your fair share. And so I think that there's something in this idea of Terumah, of being asked for these things that perhaps you were given on your way out of Egypt when they collected all of the silver and gold, or that someone planted for you 400 years ago and you're just now able to harvest. That having to give back a part of that, having to give a Terumah, could be done out of your own free will because you're very thankful for all of those things, but you might need a little nudge for it, that you might not have thought to give it yourself. And so the ask of the Terumah is a nudge to nudge you in the right direction. And then the hope is that people will then, that their hearts will incline, the nadiv libo, that they will have this inclination to do the right thing, and that then all of the gifts that are needed will come together for the temple.
Right, but as you mentioned, this is not a prescribed amount of gold or silver, which means that some people probably gave more and some gave less, and not necessarily the people who have more gave more to the temple, and those who have less gave less. So, and the Torah doesn't tell us anything about the people. What did they do? Which tribe was more uh, open minded to the idea of giving, and which tribe was more cheaper and kept some things to itself.
Yeah, it's a fascinating question, but I almost like that the Torah doesn't tell us. I'm reminded I'm about to go off into interviews and to talk to synagogues about jobs, and one of the trends in some synagogues in America now is voluntary dues. Is they tell everyone what it would cost if everyone paid the same amount in dues to run the synagogue, and then people can make whichever. They could give more than that if they are able. They could give less than that, and no one's going to know who gives more or gives less. And it's going away from the other tradition of putting people's names on when they give a lot of money or things like that. And I think there's something really beautiful in saying we're asking everyone to give, and we're not going to judge you if you don't give as much, and we're not going to put your name up if you give a lot, but that we're all in this communal project, and that we don't have a record of Yehuda was really great and they all gave a ton, but those folks over in Ephraim were really slacking. I think that there's something really beautiful in the idea that we don't always need to know how much each person gives, but that what each person gives is the right amount for them.
Right, and aren't you always suspicious that the people themselves did know, or the people in the synagogues today also do know which families, pulled their share and which were less forthcoming?
Certainly. And I mean, look, I think there's no perfect system. I don't think that there's a way to get rid of all jealousy. I think we don't live in a society where everything is perfectly equal and perfectly even. And I don't think that the Torah envisions a society in which everything is always perfectly equal or perfectly even. But I think that allowing people in this one instance to make whatever donation they want is important, as opposed to the other times that we talked about, of the times where there was specific taxation of specific amounts. I think that having both things available are important, in the same way that I think it's important that in America or in Israel that we have taxes that we pay that go to support social welfare systems, but also people give charity, people give charity or tzedakah. That's a different issue of whether those are great
Yeah, you have
translations.
tzedakah and you have philanthropy on a larger
Exactly,
scale, and
right.
you have all the things that people do.
Right. And I think that, look, it should be said that societies that tax less often have bigger cultures of philanthropy because those things need to be filled in. And I think that there's something to be said for having a greater system of social welfare that works so that you don't need as much charity and you don't need as much philanthropy. But I think that completely taking out people's ability to do something good because they want to do it, would be an unfortunate system.
Right. Just a few days ago, taped a long conversation with Leon Kass on a book he wrote about the book of Exodus, Sefer Shmot. And you know, one of the things we talked about is his ability to find meaning and even beauty in those parshas at the third part of Shemot that are mostly technical parshas. Do you have the same notion? Can you find beauty in parshas like Terumah, or do you just read them because, you know, this is what we do?
So I'll admit that I sometimes, when I'm just reading the text, have trouble finding beauty in some of these things. But I find beauty in others' ability to find a beauty. If I'm really struggling and I'm looking at it, I'll look especially to what some of the writers of Chassidut have to say that can take it and apply it to my life, or writers of Musar, and really take a look at these verses and see how we can use them as a jumping off point. I think that if we see them as the be all end all, if we just look at Tanakh and say, well, it says, you need 50 cubits of acacia wood to put on the side, then sure, it can be really hard to do something with that. But if we look to the wisdom of people both a long time ago and the people who are writing today, like Leon Kass, that we can use the beauty that they find to find our own beauty in their words.
Okay, I'll define that final answer as a both honest and useful response.
I always aim for honest and useful. I think if people can say those things about me, then I'll be doing all right.
Ben Fried, thank you so much and Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you so much. Shabbat Shalom. Toda rabah.